Hi everyone, thank you for joining me again for today's video. Today's video is going to be focused around Australia's December 10th deadline. And this deadline is for AI and automation, both alike, and it relates to our Privacy Policy Act. So what happened was at the end of 2024, Australia passed new legislation through the Privacy and Other Legislation Amendment Act. And what has changed? I'll quote this specifically for what the new law is, and then I can go ahead and explain it a bit more. So, the new legislation that has passed is an APP entity must include certain information in their APP privacy policy where the entity has arranged for a computer program to use personal information to make a decision that could be reasonably expected to significantly affect the rights or interests of an individual. So that's the new legislation. This didn't get a lot of media coverage because this was passed at the same time the legislation for the social media ban for under 16s was passed, which is where most of the media's attention went to. As people know in Australia, that was quite a controversial decision. Probably hasn't panned out as people expected, but that got a lot of media coverage at the time, whereas this amendment didn't receive as much. And as I mentioned, this was passed at the end of 2024. They gave 2 years for this to come into effect before it is enforced. And those 2 years are up on the 10th of December 2026, so this year. So where did this legislation come from? Why was this amendment made? This all arose from Robodebt. So again, most people in Australia probably have heard of the Robodebt saga. But Robodebt, it stemmed from a Centrelink program across 2015 to 2019, where Centrelink used automated decision-making processes to match welfare payments against ATO tax records to see if individual entities owed any money back to Centrelink. So if they found there was a discrepancy between these two records, they would send an automated debt collection notice to that individual to pay the balance. There was no human oversight, no human review in this process. It was solely on the automated decision-making algorithm to identify this discrepancy and then go ahead and send that debt collection notice. So what happened is that program was wrong. It wasn't doing the matching quite correctly. And then it caused the program to send debt collection notices to individuals. And again, talking about Centrelink here, so these are really low-income Australians who are already doing it tough to pay back what they perceived to owe Centrelink, even though they didn't really have this debt. So what happened is there was a class action lawsuit against Centrelink for this to get remediation for the loss of funds that were paid out that shouldn't have been. The settlement in the end came out to be $565 million, which is actually far surpasses what they collected back for the wrongful debt collection. So they really made a loss on this one, as well as, of course, the reputation and brand damage that it did them. But there was a full royal commission that went into this, that was all investigated and explored, and out of that came this amendment to our Privacy Act. So, as I mentioned with Robodebt, it was all about automated process decision making. How does this feed into the new regulation that is being enforced it's going to be enforced by OAIC? So how do these two tie together? So the new regulation is essentially saying that for APP entities, so anyone who has to follow the Australian Privacy Act, they have to be able to disclose and be transparent about all automated decision making going on within their business, and this has to be included within their Privacy Act. So automated decision making does not just mean AI. AI is a form of automated decision making, but this can be algorithms, processes, it can be other services and vendors you're already using that do this element of decision making based off a computer making decisions about humans, following a structured process, or even using AI to come to those conclusions. To put this at a very high level, one sentence, it is, does a computer use someone's personal information to make a decision that could significantly impact their rights or interests. The thing is, failing to count also acts to as part of this. So if you're using software to screen and remove participants from potentially a selection pool, let's say it's for a job interview, and you're using it to screen resumes to see who's going to progress through to the first round interviews, if you're using automated decision making to move some of those participants away as screen those, that still counts as an automated decision made. So I mentioned this affects APP entities, so those who report and follow the Australian Privacy Act. So who are these entities? They are businesses with over $3 million turnover annually. So again, these tend to be, big dogs, the ones who are making quite a bit of money. However, something to note with this one is that there are certain areas that, regardless of your turnover and size, this is going to be enforceable upon you. So those areas include health service providers, credit reporting bodies, or consumer data rights participants. So if you're in those three categories, regardless of your size, you could be a very small business, you're still going to have to follow this legislation and report upon it. The other thing to note is as well that on principle, the government has already agreed that they're going to be removing this $3 million turnover ruling as part of the Privacy Act to make it enforceable. They can actually remove that and not have that turnover aspect become an element in who has to report on this. So in the coming future, it's going to look like 95% of businesses who are currently exempt from this are going to have to report and abide by it. So whilst this isn't the case at the moment, future state, it is very likely this legislation will impact everybody. The other little thing to note as well is foreign companies aren't exactly off the hook for this one. This is applicable to anybody who is processing Australian individual data. So if the data being used by this automated decision making relates to Australian individuals, then they're still going to have to do this reporting as well. Another notable thing about this legislation is that whilst it does mandate, including within the privacy policy, the automated decision-making processes as well, another aspect to it is that it has to be human readable. It has to be in simple English. It cannot be heavy on jargon. So you cannot use technical language to make it really convoluted and difficult to follow. It has to be easy to read. It has to be transparent. So it's really trying to add that level of transparency into what decision-making tooling is used by these organizations. So what is the penalty if you don't follow through? It is actually quite a significant penalty. So for each automated decision process that you do not report upon, that you do not include within your privacy policy, it is a $62,600 fine. So this is per offense. Let's say you're using 3 automated decision-making toolings and you have not reported or included any of those within your privacy policy. That is 3 fines of $62,600. So quite substantial, quite significant. The other thing is that's for basic offences. For more severe, and again, the definition on what is severe is still not super defined, but for more severe breaches of the privacy policy, this is either the largest of $50 million, 3 times the financial benefit gained from the breach, or 30% of annual turnover. So I think this is more if, for example, with Centrelink, they found that it was creating errors. If you had tooling that you didn't include within your Privacy Act and it was causing significant issues, it's found to be unlawful, unfair, then those would be the penalties. And of course, with the introduction of this law, there's been a bit of debate, right? Is this law good? Who is it helping? Is it actually going to achieve what we need to achieve? And it is quite an interesting debate. So I think one of the main themes within this debate is, at the moment, as we mentioned, it just applies to all APP entities, plus anyone who's in credit reporting, who's in healthcare or is under the consumer data rights. So one of the largest themes we're seeing in this debate is, should we be just doing this blanket ruling for all technology needs to be included within the privacy policy, or should there be some form of risk-based approach with this? So, for example, we're saying at the moment that a small fintech company who might use facial recognition as part of their processes has the same reporting obligations as a large bank. Are these two really of the same size to and warrant the same risk to have the same reporting obligations? So that's one of the debates. Should there be a risk approach with this where we're having a look at what the risk of not disclosing this could potentially be, what information is it actually processing, and what is the scale of impact if something were to occur that was wrong. The second theme, which I think hits a bit more close to home for me, is that, okay, yes, now these companies are including within their privacy policy all the technology used for decision making. They're including which data is being used for this decision making. They have to do that as part of the legislation as well. So they have to identify, okay, if this is personal information about me, what information is it? So that's one aspect. But great, that's included, that's there. What next? It doesn't actually change any of the decisions being made by this tooling. It is just telling people we're doing it. There is transparency, yes, but where is that level of accountability? It's an interesting gap, and I feel like Australia as a whole, we're definitely lacking on our AI automation legislation full stop. So there's not a lot of regulation, especially in the AI space, which I'll touch on a bit later. But yeah, it's very interesting that, okay, cool, I'm disclosing that these are the tools that I'm using, this is the decisions it's making with the information that it's got. But what next? It doesn't stop it from being unfair. It doesn't ask how the decision has come to be. It is just saying, this is what we're using. Do you know what? We can be super biased. We can be super unethical with it, which of course you would hope not, because that's going to come with a reputational and brand risk for that company. But what is stopping them? There is not much that is. So what should these businesses be doing right now to prepare for this legislation change from December 10th? Well, hopefully these larger businesses, they know they've got this reporting obligation coming up, so I'm sure they're already on it having a think. But really there's going to be 4 key steps in this process. Number 1 is discovery. I feel like this is the most crucial part of this process, understanding what tools do we actually have organization-wide that is doing this automated decision processing. This is harder is because a lot of the tooling and vendors they might already be using might just have this baked within the process and they're not fully aware that this is what's running in the background. So being able to reach out to the vendors and confirm what decision-making processes do we have in these softwares is quite important. And then just do that discoverability piece to ensure you've got an inventory of everything that is using potentially AI, RPA to make these decisions. Second thing from there is that they have to update their privacy policy in plain English, where they have to be able to disclose this tooling. They have to do so in a really simple and transparent way that's easy to read and understand for the everyday person. And they need to highlight what information the systems have and what decisions the systems make next. They have to build a human review pathway as well. So the OAIC isn't just going to be stopping at having this included within the privacy policy. They have to be able to be reviewed by a human upon request as well. So then if the OAIC come in and try to enforce this legislation, they have to say, great, for this processing tool, I want to be able to review the automated decisions made by this tool. And finally, they do have to act quick because, again, from when this is being recorded, this is mid-May, start of May. So they've got till end of year. That's not a lot of time. So they should be jumping onto this now. This is because it applies for all systems in their business. It is not necessarily just decisions going forward or new tooling going forward from December 10th. This is everything in their ecosystem at the moment as of December 10th. everything counts, even old legacy systems, which a lot of these companies will have. So they need to get a move on, start to understand what is going on within their environment. And to finish off, just wanted to touch on the bigger picture of Australia and this legislation and how it compares to some other legislations and frameworks being released globally. So honestly, Australia is quite a bit behind, especially I'm going to discuss this from an AI perspective. So for AI legislation, Australia is quite far behind compared to other regions. The EU have their EU AI Act, which is quite stringent. It's really explainable about the information that AI is using as to understand how decisions come to be. Whereas this legislation here, you don't have to explain any of that. You just have to say, we're making decisions. This is the info. This is what decision will be made. But you do not have to explain how you got from here to there with how that decision was formulated. Whereas the EU AI Act really demands that level of explainability. The US, they've got different patchworks of legislation, so this seems to be done on a state by state basis. So, whilst it's not a cohesive, coherent federal level legislation, they do have state by state wide legislation to start to enforce AI and the way it can be used within businesses. But yes, Australia is really lacking in this because we do not have any AI specific legislation. This change here is actually probably what we have closest to. And whilst it does cover AI, this also covers automated decision making, as I mentioned. So this could be RPA, so robotic process automation. It's not necessarily just AI. And what it looks like is going to happen in the Australian landscape is that we're just going to be amending existing legislation from many, many years ago, quite old legislation to try to update the language to encompass AI, which personally I do not think is the correct approach. AI is a different beast altogether. It would require its own specific legislation. It's very hard to adapt old language and intention to cover off such a new technology. Australia did have the intention to create their own AI legislation, but that was actually halted, I think maybe last year or a few months ago. So that is no longer being explored, which is quite an interesting decision, which on the circuit probably record a whole episode about on its own. So stay tuned for that. Actually, I might just do that. But yeah, it's a really interesting global landscape that Australia, I think, has a little work to do to catch up. So to finish this episode, I'm going to pose a question to you and feel free to chime in the comments as well and give it an answer. So if Robodebt were to happen after December 10th this year, once this legislation is in enforcement, do you believe that the scandal itself, so the automatic debt collection notices sent out by Centrelink and then the class action lawsuit that came out of it, do you think all of that would have been prevented with this new legislation? So let me know in the comments what you think. Thank you so much for joining me in today's episode, and I hope to see you in the next one. Thank you.